Hey guys, it's Tomatoda. So today I wanted to show you guys a tutorial on how I paint my resin pieces, but as usual when I film, a lot of things don't go very smoothly. To be honest, I do make a lot of mistakes when I craft off camera, but for some reason when I'm on camera, the amount of mistakes I make amplifies. But hopefully it'll just make the video more entertaining for you and you can learn from my mistakes. At least the end results are pretty good, in my opinion. So I'm going to be painting on Hamfrey here. The mold design for him has these engraved indented edges, which normally I like to paint black, like with Hamlet here. But because Hamfrey is already black, I'm going to paint the edges white. I'm going to use white acrylic paint with a flat paintbrush to fill in all the outlines. Don't worry about painting outside of the lines, just make sure you fill in the indents. If your resin piece doesn't have these outlined engravements, just skip this step. This Hamfrey piece came from a mold by Star Child Creations. After I finish painting, it's still wet by the way, I put it on top of this piece of paper so I can trace it with a pencil and plan out the details. It's going to be a guideline so I don't have to make a lot of mistakes on the actual resin piece. I can make the mistakes on the paper first, erase it, redraw it, etc. And for Hamfrey here, I realized that instead of drawing the eyes first, positioning the mouth area first gave me a better placement for the rest of his facial features. I know it looks scary, but trust the process. Now that the paint has dried, I'm going to take my cotton pad with acetone on it and wipe off the surface. I'm going to first focus on wiping off the paint that's outside of the line. It doesn't have to be exactly clean because I'm going to then use the other side of the pad, and that will be to focus on wiping off all the smeared paint that's on the surface. You don't have to wipe off the sides for now. Also want to say that wiping off the surface with acetone is going to prep it for better doming and a better paint job later on because the surface might be oily just naturally and there's a possibility that it'll repel paint or resin later on. So even if your piece doesn't have outlines like this one, I recommend you still wipe the surface with acetone at least. There's a small hole here, I guess, and the paint was actually stuck inside, so I took my knife and cut it out. Not a big deal because it's pretty small and shallow. When I dome it with resin later on, it'll be invisible. I'm going to stick Hamfrey onto a stand to help me handle him better without having to put my finger oils all over the surface. And this is when I realized that I had nail polish on, but I just rubbed acetone all over it. Womp womp. Anyways, the two mediums I like to use when painting on resin is 1. Acrylic paint. The brand I use is Artist Loft, which is Michael's brand. It's cheap and it works well for me. And 2, I like to use Posca paint pens or paint markers in 7mm. They're actually my absolute favorite. What I like about these ones specifically is that the fine tip here is not felt, it's actually plastic. So it doesn't wear out and it stays sharp. For the ears, I'm going to use this pink Posca marker. Make sure to shake it thoroughly before you use it or else you're going to get watered down paint. And don't knock over your shit like I did. Before using it on the resin piece, test it out on a piece of paper first to make sure that it's not watery. Unfortunately, if you can see, the paint is pulling away from some areas because either the surface wasn't prepped properly or I touched it with the oils on my finger at some point and it's repelling the paint. What I'm going to do is re-prep the surface with acetone on a cotton swab. Oh, and make sure your Posca paint doesn't have fibers on it either. Sometimes they do get caught on the plastic tip. Now I'm trying it again and see how it colors in very beautifully. For the other details on Hamfrey, I'm going to take the white paint from earlier and mix my own mint color because I don't have a mint colored Posca pen. I need a bit of blue and a bit of green. But as you can see, the cap of the green has a crack in it, so the entrance of the tube dried up. Sometimes if you poke past the dried part, you can get fresh paint underneath. That was not the case this time and it just exploded all over my fingers, so I had to go wash it. When I came back, I forgot to hit record, so I had to reenact the missing footage. What I ended up doing was extracting the paint from that hole and I used tape to seal it up. And since this was double-sided tape, I used my fingers to get rid of one of the sticky sides so it becomes a one-sided tape. My life is amazing. Taking some green, I'm adding it to the white, and same for the blue. You want to add a little bit at a time until it's the color that you like. I like to use these dotting tools to apply acrylic paint rather than a paintbrush because some of the acrylic paints are pretty sheer, which means multiple layers are needed, and of course paintbrushes leave streaks. But the dotting tool gives you a smoother and thicker surface, so that means less work. Referencing my drawing, I remembered that I should start by painting the mouth blob first. Unfortunately, I was a dumbass and I didn't add any water to my paint. I should have added a drop or two of water because the paint was pretty thick and it's gonna result in a goopy mess. It's only gonna get thicker from here on, but I was convincing myself that I didn't have to get up and get water and this was perfectly fine. I messed up a little bit here, so I'm taking my knife to scrape off the mistake. Unfortunately, my knife is blunt, the tip broke off, so it's not giving me an accurate and clean scrape either. You're going to hear me say this throughout the video. I should have added water, I should have added water, I should have added water. And now I'm cringing as I'm watching this, and I'm mad at the fact that I convinced myself that I didn't need water. Hindsight is 20/20, bitch. Now I'm adding the other details with the same mint color. I didn't like how the right foot was shaped, so I took the cotton swab that had acetone on it and wiped it off. Even if the paint is fully dry, acetone will remove it. Then I'm saving the rest of the mint for the eyebrows because I'm going to draw the eyes next. Now here I go in with the eyebrows. I should have used more water because as you can see, the paint dried even more, so it was even gunkier. But at the time, I was like, it's totally fine. Once it dries up, my knife technique will take care of this, no problem. It didn't. You'll see that later. While I let the eyebrows dry, I give his eyeballs a second coat because his first coat was a bit transparent. So the thing with the Posca pens is if you paint a thick coat at once, when the paint dries, you will see cracks. Sometimes it's an issue, sometimes it's not. It depends on the situation and the project, I guess. Now moving on, I'm going to work on Humphrey's clothes. There's a light beige and a dark beige, so I'm going to mix white with this yellow brownish color and using a big dotting tool to spread the paint. As you can see, the first few strokes are pretty smooth, but as time passes and the paint gets gunkier, more texture will show. I should have added water. When you add water, just mix like a drop or two at a time because if you add too much water, it'll become bubbly and when it dries, it'll have a lot of mini holes in it. So just one or two at a time to make sure that you have the right amount. I should take my own advice, right? Now I'm coloring in the sleeves, but I realized that there's not a lot of contrast between the vest and the sleeves. So for the next coat of paint, I'm gonna try better. Taking my brown Posca marker, I was gonna color in Humphrey's eyes. His eyes aren't exactly black, it's a dark brown, but my Posca pen did not match it at all. What it did match though was his nose, so I stopped doing his eyes and I went ahead and colored his nose part, and then afterwards I colored his teeth with white. While I wait for the teeth and the messed up eyeball to dry, I'm going to fix the eyebrows because that is now dry. This is my knife technique that I was so confident in before. Basically, I slice and scrape it off. Usually when the paint is thick, it peels off nicely from the surface, but it did not here. I know in the video, it looks kind of like it's doing a good job, but the camera is lying to you. I switched blades here because this one had a slightly sharper tip, but the results were still whatever. Yes, I know some of my tools need replacing, but it's hard for me to spend money on it when technically it still works. It's not destroyed, you know? I can still get some function out of it. I'm cleaning up the area with acetone. Be careful not to erase the other parts of his face. Now that the eyeballs have dried, I'm taking dark brown acrylic paint and dotting it over the mistake. Dotting the eyes very carefully. The black Posca marker, as you can see, is a lot thinner than the other colors. And that's because I've used this one a lot. There's still a lot of ink inside. It's just when you first use a new Posca marker, the paint overflows or it like bleeds out. So it colors pretty thickly. But the more you use it, it becomes regular and thinner like this. As you can see, the clothes are all dried, so I'll be applying my second layer. I thought I made the new mix a darker tan color, but as I'm adding it on, it's just the same color as before. And because I didn't add water, I couldn't smooth it out, and I got desperate, so I used a paintbrush to even out the surface, and to my surprise, it did a fairly good job. And because the new vest wasn't any darker, I opted to make the sleeves lighter instead by adding more white. Now all that's left is drawing in the details of the shirt. I added white paint to the dark brown paint that was used for Humphrey's eyes earlier to get this color so I can paint on the rest of the details. As you can see, the paint here flows a lot better because I finally got off my lazy ass and added a drop of water. If only I did this in the beginning. Here, I'm cleaning off some of the areas where I went out of line with more acetone, and pretty much the paint job is done. Now it's ready to be Mod Podged and domed. I have a separate video going over everything from this point on in more detail if you want to check that out. I'm going to dome it with glittery resin, and remember that little indented cut? See how covering it with resin makes it disappear? And I don't know if you can tell, but I added this heart for the little logo on his vest and some pink cheeks that look green now, but whatever. Let that shit cure. And after it's cured, peel off the Mod Podge and resin spill, and then finally clean up the paint on the sides with acetone. Ta-da! Humphrey is done! Yay! And thank you guys for watching. Learn from my mistakes. I hope I do. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye!